I'm Richard Niles. What's going on? I'll tell you. My rare and historically significant interview with legendary Motown arranger David Van DePitte, recorded for my BBC Radio 2 documentary series in 2002. Best known for his work on one of the most critically acclaimed albums of all time, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, David Van DePitte's contribution is significant in so many ways. He was a pivotal American arranger, composer, and producer, best known for his influential work at Motown Records during its golden era. Born in Detroit, Michigan, Van DePitte studied at the Westlake College of Music in Los Angeles. A classically trained musician with a deep appreciation for jazz, he began as a trombonist with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. He joined Motown in the late 1960s and quickly became one of its most respected arrangers. His most iconic work was for Marvin Gaye's groundbreaking 1971 album, What's Going On, where his jazzy, lush, cinematic string and horn arrangements helped redefine the sound of soul music. I'm not aware of any other pop arrangement that uses a non-stop counter melody in this way, giving the song a feeling of sophistication, depth, and gravitas that it otherwise would have lacked. The album's seamless blend of classical, jazz, and R&B influences, especially in tracks like Mercy, Mercy Me and Inner City Blues, was largely shaped by Van DePitte's visionary orchestrations. Throughout his career at Motown, he was able to elevate songs with this sophistication while still retaining the groove and the emotional core of the music. In 1970, he arranged Ball of Confusion and Psychedelic Shack for the Temptations. In the same year, he did Stillwater Love for the Four Tops and If I Were Your Woman for Gladys Knight and the Pips, and Stoned Love for the Supremes. In 1971, he arranged If You Really Love Me for Stevie Wonder and I Don't Blame You at All by Smokey Robinson. Now, beyond Motown, he later worked for artists such as Paul Anka and George Clinton. Although not as widely recognized as some of his peers, David Van DePitte's contributions were crucial in shaping the sound that distinguished Motown in the 1970s. His work continues to inspire arrangers and producers across genres. He passed away in 2009 at the age of 74. So listen now and enjoy our interview, a rare view from the shop floor of Motown's production line, working with Marvin Gaye, Gordy, producers such as Frank Wilson, and musicians such as his friend James Jamerson. No one with soul will want to miss this.
Radio Richard.
Today I'm happy to have with me the legendary Motown arranger David Van DePitte. David, how did it all start for you?
Well, as a young man, I began arranging, probably around 11 or 12 years old. I came from a relatively musical family. My mother and father were amateur musicians, but quite good. And I just seemed to get the bug, and I started playing piano. And in the process of studying piano, I found piano playing a little boring. I couldn't get with it, But I noticed that notes on paper seemed to fascinate me a great deal. I found that I started trying to arrange my own notes on paper, which bugged teachers to no end, of course. But I don't know, for some reason I always have been fascinated by physically putting notes on a piece of paper. It sounds silly, but it's true. As I got a little bit older, I started gravitating more and more toward writing and a little less toward playing, and eventually I had to become a player to make a living, of course. But as I got a little bit older, I decided that rather than going to aeronautical engineering school, I was going to go to a music school, which I subsequently did. Then I began to take writing quite seriously. I really lucked up in the sense that I was sitting in Detroit here when Motown Records was going well and got hired there. So that gave me the absolute opportunity I'd been needing to quit playing and become an official arranger, at least,
So how did you actually get the gig at Motown?
A friend of mine was working there, a fellow by the name of John Trudell, who was a trumpet player here in Detroit, and a very good one at that. Had been working for the company for some time, and I was working with John at a club. And he said, you know, David, he said, they're looking for another arranger at Motown. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, would you like to go down? He said, I'll introduce you, and you can interview for the job, you know. I did, and subsequently got the job. And actually, oddly enough, originally I was hired to write what they believed were upcoming movies. They knew they were going to go into the movie business at one point. So they hired me on the basis of that and said, well, gee, maybe you can kind of sit around the arranging department and get a little work here and there. And, you know, when you meet some of the producers and artists and whatnot, and see what you can do, you know. Well, as it turns out, of course, I became an arranger in the arranging department of the record division and never did do a movie. So life is strange.
It sure is. Who was the guy who actually auditioned you there at Motown?
The fellow that was in charge of that process at the time was named Henry Cosby. Henry was sort of head of A&R, et cetera. Well, not quite head of A&R. He was sort of head of the arranging department. He oversaw what, you know, the fellows in the department did. So he interviewed me, and I don't think I talked to anyone else but him.
Well, Motown was known as Berry Gordy's empire. Did you deal with him a lot?
No, not at first. I was there for about 5.5 years, and later on during my tenure, I did have direct contact with Barry, but by and large, he was sort of a hands-off kind of fellow with the arranging department. He just wanted to hear finished product. So we would do what we did, and he would yay or nay it at the Monday morning meeting, you know. And if it was close or something that he thought could be improved, then he might give you a call and say, hey, would you do this, that, or the other thing, and we'll change it. And I think it'll be a better product. The great thing about him is that he had an incredible innate sense of what the public was looking for. I mean, he was unbelievable. He just was marvelous. He could pick a hit out of a whole barrel of nonsense, you know, and you'd say, oh, come on, there's no way, you know. And sure enough, it would end up being a hit. So he had a very good read on the public, you know.
Of course, you worked a lot with the great guys down there in the Snake Pit. Were you buddies with them? Did you hang out with them? Did you play with them a lot?
No, you know, I knew some of the fellows. James Jamerson and I were good friends, and Earl Van Dyke, the keyboard player, was a good friend of mine, and Joe Messina, the guitar player, one of the guitar players, was a good friend. But I didn't really know the other fellows hardly at all. And when I jumped in there, I actually didn't even understand the process because I was coming from a jazz kind of background, and the R&B kind of feel was different for me, even though it was bluesy and whatnot and what have you. It just was a different kind of a feel. So I had to sort of learn as I went along by the seat of my pants and catch up with what everybody was doing there and how many notes were put on paper and how many were understood and implied. And it was interesting. It was an interesting process. It was great.
Yeah, it must have been. I'm wondering if you could tell me what it was like to actually be there in the studio working every day. What was your process?
Certainly. In the early days, we were a group of 4 arrangers, okay? And we serviced somewhere around, I would say there must have been about 60 different producers. And these 60 different producers, of course, would have their favorite arranger as, you know, you began to know them and work with them and whatnot. There were times when we all were really jammed up with work because it was a tremendously high-volume place for 4 arrangers to be cranking out all the material that was coming out of that place. So we'd get to a position where I may, for instance, meet with a producer and or artist, and they'd have a selection of maybe 3 or 4 tunes that they wanted to do, and I would meet with them and put together the rhythm parts, which would be the piano, bass, drums, maybe some percussion, etc. Then they would decide that they would like to do some strings, they would like to do some horns, but when that time came to pass, I would be occupied otherwise and couldn't do it. So one of the other arrangers would then take over and do that portion of the record. So there were many times when we would follow through completely with a project, as I did with Marvin Gaye's What's Going On project. That was something I did completely. But there were other times as well where things didn't go that way. I mean, one fellow would do the rhythm tracks, and another fellow would do the horn tracks, and another person would do the string tracks if there were some. It was just sort of who was available at the moment. And everybody was very competent, so there was no, real problem there.
And who were the other guys that you worked with?
The other three arrangers were, of course, Paul Reiser, who was just about the first arranger there after Joe Hunter, I guess, and then Wade Marcus, and let me see, who was the fourth fellow?
Willie Shorter?
Willie Shorter, thank you very much.
So if you guys all were working on different tracks, and sometimes you'd do different things on different tracks, was there kind of an understanding among you about what was the Motown sound?
Oh, yes, because the idea of the company was that we were looking for a reasonably homogeneous kind of a product coming out of there, even though each of the artists was a bit different and this and that. There had to be a certain kind of a standard that we used, and in order to do that, we had to understand each other, we had to understand each other's styles, and be able to take over at a moment's notice, because there were times when literally it sounds silly, but we didn't go home for days at a time. We would literally just catch a cat nap in the studio or wherever we could on a cot because the recording schedule was so heavy. So you had to sort of be ready at a moment's notice to just jump into the breach, and take over anyone's project. So yes, you're right. We did. We understood each other quite well.